Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Local Pension Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Before we begin, can I just remind everyone to turn on their microphones when you want to speak or invited to speak, and just turn them off afterwards, and that'll be fine. So this morning we have received apologies from Mr. James Henry. Mr. Grimley wants to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay. I hope that the committee will join me in showing gratitude to the chairman, as he'll be retiring at the elections in May. Tom had first been elected to the County Council in 2018 and has been chairman of the local pension committee since June 2021. Tom has overseen significant growth of the fund, with an increase from 5.4 billion to 6.6 billion. In particular, he has provided strong advocacy for pooling, with an increase in pooled assets rising from 36% at the time of his appointment to nearly 60% as it is today. The fund has also become simpler over the course of his tenure, with the number of investment managers reduced, providing more improved governance from officers and LGPS central resource. Tom has provided a strong voice for shareholders' interests and the fund's fiduciary, I did get that right, duty, including his time as chairman of the Joint Term Committee. Whilst also overseeing the fund's first net zero climate strategy, which I think is very important, and this has met his interim 2030 targets early. So particularly thanks to the climate focused in investing on this. Through his strong chairmanship and experience, the fund has continued to go from strength to strength in the best interest of all our scheme members, which I'm sure members and officers will join me in thanking him for. I just add a quick personal note as chairman. Tom has been a fantastic chairman to me as vice chair as well on the committee, and we often, well, we do always have a pre-free chairman's meeting beforehand. So I'd just like to hope that members officers will join me in thanking Tom.
Thank you, Dan. I have to say, it didn't seem to get any simpler to me.
Tom, before you respond, I absolutely endorse that. I'm happy to second that wholeheartedly. But could I just add to the proposal as well, because we are at a significant milestone. My colleague, Councillor Bill, he has also said he's removing from the pension committee. He's been here a long time, so we can have a joint celebration. I don't want to detract from you, sir, but actually I would like to throw Councillor David Bill in there as well, simply because he's been a member for a long time and will probably not be following May's elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Yeah, and I'd second that. Thanks very much, David, for all your work on the committee.
And thank you, Chairman, for steering us through turbulent times that appear to be getting worse. But, this committee is going to miss your steady chairmanship, because it's really needed in these troubled times.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Right, so now on to the main agenda item, minutes for the meeting held on the 31st of January 2025. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of January 2025 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. So item 2 is question time. I've received no questions. Item 3, questions asked by members under standing orders 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions. To advise any items which the chair has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda, that I have not been notified of any urgent items. So on to item 5, declaration of interest in respect of any items on the agenda. Has anybody got any? No. So the first substantive item on today's agenda is the 2025 fund valuation results of the stabilised employer modelling, and it's on the pages 9 to 42 of the agenda. So Ian Howe, Pensions Manager, is present and is going to go through the report for us. I also welcome Tom Hall from Hymans Robertson, who has joined us online. Good morning, Tom, and thanks for joining us. So, Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Mr. Goodman, can you just turn your mic on?
I still.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. So this is the report that details the results of the stabilised employer modelling. If you cast your minds back to November, when we brought a committee report through to yourselves, we were laying out the principles that we were going to be using, which was increasing the prudence to 80%, adopting the funding target of 120% to provide the buffer, and to retain the stabilised policy, which we've had in place for a while, which is the 2% increase or decrease to rates over the valuation year by year. So all the modelling has been done on that basis. We've been working hard for the last few months with Hymans. Tom is on the call as well, as Chair has said. So I propose really to jump within the report, if that's okay, to the table which is shown on point 42, because all of the information reflects what those calculation methodologies have been used. Table 42 details the results that we've worked through with Hymans. So the first column in grey is the current rates for the stabilised employers. Stabilised employers are those that are listed in the table. Hymans have calculated that the primary rate, which is the cost of future accrual from April 26 through to March 29, will be around about 18%. So we've used the 18% throughout for all of the employers for the primary rate. And then the secondary rate has been adjusted to reflect the results of the modelling. Now we've looked through all the different scenarios that Hymans have provided. We've also looked at the impact on the cash flows, and indeed also we've looked at something we call the risk of regret, which is the percentage chance of rates then increasing at the next valuation as well, which is the final column there. So Leicestershire County Council's being 11. The highest one there is Blaby at 22. So we're comfortable that the risk of regret is a manageable number in all of those employers. And this is based on the maximum of 2% per year. So 2%, 2%, 2% over the 3 years. And the total rate is effectively a 6% reduction, because we believe that we can offer the employers the maximum rate reduction for the next 3 years. We've also considered the budgetary issues that employers are facing, and we are very aware that across local government financially it's a difficult time, and it is so and remains so with the employers. So we believe we're able to offer a full 6% reduction in year one. So from April 26, instead of going a 2%, 2%, 2%, instead we'll do a 6%, a full reduction, and then a stabilised no change, no change, thereby giving the employers the maximum reduction as quickly as possible. That is still within the boundaries of the stabilised rules, but gives the benefit to the employers as quickly as they can receive it. Within this, we recognise that markets remain volatile. It's a difficult time out there. So we still caveat this, that this is based on latest, everybody's kind of nodding, the latest modelling based on what we know at the moment. This has to be recalculated and checked again at March when this is finalised, because March 31st of March 25 is the actual valuation date. The rates then don't come into play for the year. That's the way that the valuation process works. So we also propose that we'll have a a mid-valuation review in September 27 to check how this is progressing, and we'll bring that back to committee as well. That's all I propose to say, but obviously I'm very happy to take questions, and Tom's here as well to take questions as well. So happy to talk that through. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, is there anything you'd like to say at this stage, or?
No, but I mean, maybe just come in and say good morning again. Great to see everyone. Echo the sentiments for the Chair and Councillor Bill as well. But Ian's given a really good summary. I think it's fair to say that we came to committee in November, provisionally agreed to the 3 key items that Ian's touched on: the increased prudence, the funding buffer, and looking to achieve the maximum reduction for the employers, which we felt would be a fair outcome for everybody involved. So the modelling exercise that we've undertaken is really just sought to ratify and to test those decisions, and what we've gone through and what's outlined in the paper suggests that is all in line with the expectations. So I don't really have much more to say on top of what Ian said. It's a really good paper that he's pulled together as well, and just welcome any questions.
Thank you, Tom. So, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you. 3 from me, Chair. First is a technical question. So the 6% reduction across the board, in terms of the risk of regret, does that risk of regret go down equally across all the percentages? So 6% against obviously a higher percentage or lower percentage. So is it uniform? Second question is around, whilst a 6% reduction is welcome to all employers, and then a 0 increase or reduction for the following 3 years, also welcome. But how do you manage expectations? Because when somebody's given something, even a 0 is less than a 6% reduction. So it's managing expectations going forward, given the change of the model in there. And finally, the third one was around Blaby and LCC. I understand the 11 and the 22%. I don't understand why there's such a disparity when the previous figures were so close. That's just my misunderstanding. So just a simple explanation on that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
So, I mean, I think I'm happy to take the technical questions at the end. I don't know if Ian wants to answer the first question around the expectation. I mean, I think all I would say is that the employers have been on a journey for a number of valuation cycles, and I think the expectation and an understanding of what the fund's trying to achieve is pretty sound, but I don't know if Ian wants to come in there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Indeed, the managing kind of going forward, I think these stabilised employers have been on the stabilised process with us for a number of years, and they understand that at the times when it's been tough, we've not put rates up as high. We've done exactly what that's for. It's stabilising. So when times are tough, we've not asked them to pay considerably high. We've stepped it, and at the times now when things are looking better, we're stepping it back down. So I think the employers understand this. So I think managing expectations going forward, I think we will work with the employers on that. We've got a meeting with the treasurers next week to go through this with the stabilised employers. So I expect that's okay in terms of that point. In terms of the risk of regret, I think I'm going to wait for Tom to answer the sort of the technical side on that, if I may. Tom, can I refer that one across to you?
Of course you can, yeah. So we'll maybe we'll pick them off one at a time. So on the risk of regret, I'll maybe just spend a couple of minutes. I know there is some things in the appendix report which seeks to explain what this is. So it's a new metric. It's really important when we look at any of the modelling. You know, we're not looking into a crystal ball. We're looking at statistical models. We're trying to make a judgment based on uncertain markets and broader funding strategy, while looking at the results and looking at qualitative factors and things like this. One of the most important things, as well as, so for a long time we've had this thing called the likelihood of success, which is, you know, effectively a bar that you're trying to achieve when you're looking at setting sound and reasonable funding plans. It is also very important to look at downside risk, and I think in the past we've struggled to articulate a tangible, meaningful element of downside risk which resonates with employers. And thankfully at this valuation, so this is a new metric which we've managed to develop. So what it does is it looks at the modelling results, it sort of projects those forward 3 years. And it says, okay, given all the kind of stochastic model, the 5,000 different simulations of economic futures, when we look at this in 3 years' time within that model, what is the the number of chances effectively that something's gone wrong in the economy or otherwise, and actually a decision needs to be made at the next valuation in 2028 that may mean that rates have to go up. Now it's probably worth saying that we sometimes simplify that downside risk to make it more sort of easy to discuss as rates might have to go up. But what it really means is that a decision would need to be made. Now the levers that you have that you could pull on in 3 years' time would, of course, be contributions, as we've talked about. But you would also have things like prudence and investment strategy as other levers that you might be able to pull on to make sure that you manage stability for employers. So that's the new metric. I think it is really good. FDs and other stakeholders we've talked to really do engage with this metric, which is good. It feels meaningful to them. It's about a 1 in 5 chance across the board, which feels acceptable. It's the complement of the kind of 4 in 5 chance that we're trying to achieve when we're talking about the likelihood of success of a funding plan. Under the bonnet, that there's quite a lot of things that go in. So to specifically answer the question, it's things like the funding level, it's things like the membership profile of the different employers, also the contribution rate that's in payment. Blaby and Leicestershire have got a pretty similar contribution rate, so it will be those other factors. It will be the existing funding position and also the funding profile, which is the reason that the two are so different.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tom. Mr. King.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I still haven't got this risk of regret, what that is. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to try and explain that again. So just so I've got this right, so what we're basically saying is, because the fund is 100% funded, again, because the fund is is well funded at the moment, what we're saying is that in 3 years' time, is that right? There's an 80% chance that we'll still be 120% funded. Have I got that right? Is that what you're saying? Because it's all a bit technical. I'm just trying to put it in very simple terms so that I can understand. So what we're saying is, because of that, we don't need to. We can reduce the amount we're asking from all the employers in what you call the primary rate. So take that down to 18% from 24%. But the secondary rates, I assume, are unchanged, because some of those schemes, and I'm a councillor at Harbour District Council, and I know that that particular portion of the scheme is in deficit, so they're having to make an additional contribution, quite a hefty one still, to catch up for that. So I'm assuming that's why the variable secondary rates are there, because different employers have got different levels of additional gaps in funding that they need to contribute towards. Is that the correct interpretation? Have I got that wrong? I'm grateful if you could clarify that. And also just try and explain this risk of regret again. It's a very strange phrase, so I'm assuming it's some ancient terminology that hasn't caught up with the modern day.
No, I mean, I would welcome any suggestions for a name of this. So it's as you can imagine, we've developed the analytics that would, the output that we wanted to show. The actual name is just something that we thought might feel meaningful to an employer. The risk of regretting a decision. Effectively, you make a decision at this valuation, and in 3 years' time you regret it. But look, effectively, the way of simplifying it is, so the risk of regret is the chance that you'll need to take some sort of remedial action at the next valuation. So effectively, the chance, if you put contribution, say you're an employer, you're paying 26% of pay, you go down to 20, and then you say, okay, actually at the next valuation, that was the wrong decision. We shouldn't have gone down to 20, and actually we need to put contribution rates back up again. So we're trying to put a number around that chance. Okay, so in theory, so for Blaby, you're saying, okay, there's about a 1 in 5 chance that contributions might have to go up at the next valuation. So that's the new metric. We don't make decisions necessarily around that metric. So just stepping back for a second from that technical one, and for a long time when we've carried out this modelling, we talk about the likelihood of success, which is in the appendix report. There's actually, I think it's page 17 of the appendix report, which is page 35 in the committee pack. It talks about the summary of results, and ordinarily, and the most important factor, quantitative factor when we look at the modelling, is this thing called the likelihood of success. Now, what that means is we're saying that we try and set a funding plan over the next 20 years. Okay, we're talking about pensions, we're talking about long-term stable employers in the pension fund. So we're not looking at short periods of time, such as the 3-year valuation. We're not even looking at 6 or 9 years. So we set, I think, sorry, for this fund, it's 17 years. So we say, let's try and be fully funded in 17 years' time. Gives you enough time to play with to get there in a sort of manageable fashion. And what the model does is it says, okay, and we run 5,000 different simulations. The future's uncertain, so we run different projections from today out to year 17, and we say, okay, out of those 5,000 projections, we want 4,000 of them to be at least fully funded, and that's your kind of mark in the sand. That's your 80% likelihood of success, 4 out of 5 chance that you'll have enough money in 17 years' time. Now, that 4 out of 5 chance isn't, it's not the regulation. It's not golden rule as such. That's effectively your sort of prudence level. And I'd say, just for wider context, the majority of the LGPS are now around sort of 75 or 80, probably closer to 80. So you're broadly in the pack there. So that's the most important metric when we do the modelling. It's called the likelihood of success. And in that page, in the committee pack on page 35, all of the employers make it above that bar. It's a minimum bar, okay? And when we've ran the modelling, giving everybody the 6% reduction, they've all made it over that bar. Okay, they're all in the kind of mid-80s on that particular metric. The risk of regret is just this new one. Really, it's more to explain that nothing's certain, and especially when you're discussing with the Treasurer's meeting or with FDs, to explain, okay, we've given you this reduction, the modelling supports the reduction, and we're comfortable with that being the outcome. But for employers who are in surplus, and maybe there's a level of expectation there, it's just to remind everybody that there is risk involved. Okay, and there is a chance that, okay, we've done all this modelling at this valuation, we've made decisions, we're comfortable with those decisions, but look, ultimately it could be in 3 years' time we might need to revert on those decisions, and maybe contributions have to go up. So it's really just to give that extra meaning and awareness and caution around any of the decisions that we take. Does that simplify it a little bit more? Sorry, I know if it's kind of waffled a little bit.
Just bear with me a second. I've got another.
I'll come back. Yeah, that's fine. You actually explained that, so I do understand that now. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so the next person, I have Mr. Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to keep a careful eye on this. We'll make a decision now, which is fine. I'm sort of, having woke up to the headline this morning that the UK economy is unexpectedly shrunk in January. Well, I'm not quite sure how unexpected that is. I'm in the construction industry. A lot of property investment has since late last year been put on hold, waiting to see if there's going to be changes in the statement by the Chancellor in March. We'll have to see what comes on there. So I just think we obviously need to keep careful on these things and make sure that things do pan out as sort of well as we're predicting, which I'm a bit cynical about that. But as I see where we are.
Okay, thanks very much. So, Mr. Booth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the 80% prudence level, I seem to recall that used to be the level many years ago. So I think we're sort of reverting back to where we are, which I support. Two sort of questions or comments as well. You've got the prudence I agree with. The equities supposedly are going to got a return of 8% per annum over 20 years, which I think is pushing it a bit, I think, based on previous experience. So that sort of, my view is I'm pleased that we've got an element of prudence in here, because I think we might need it for that. The other questions within that, which relate to the mid-year review, does that mean that could change the, if things tank, could the employer's rate change quicker? Or is that really just to say, give them the heads up that if things are going badly, 3 years' time, things might actually have to go up if we have this risk of regret of this 20%. And the other question is life expectancy is saying that the improvements of life expectancy is not going as well as or badly as whatever, however you do it. In other words, people are not living as long as they were expecting to, but is that the same position for people in this fund? Because that's a different demographic to the rest of the population. So that's my...
Yeah, so we'll maybe just try and pick these off one at a time. So I think, first of all, and you're right to express caution. I think both the comments there around the current environment, the economy at home, but also geopolitics and other politics at home as well. So there's a lot of things out there. We've spoken to the committee before about some of the funding risks, and I agree with all of the comments there. And I think this is exactly just why we are proceeding cautiously. We've got two sort of measures of prudence in there. Effectively, we've got the 80% prudence, but also the 120 sort of funding target. And what we're talking about today supports those decisions, and also that'll be the messaging when we're conversing with other stakeholders, predominantly the employers, when we're talking about this. So I think that's right. I don't think that's lost on anyone. All of the key risks out there are very difficult to predict with certainty. And just while we're talking about risk, so on the longevity risk, again, that's just another uncertainty. I think we brought something to the committee back in September where we looked at some of these risks, and yes, we look at local demographics, and the Leicestershire area is reflected in that particular assumption. But then the more important assumption on longevity is when we think about improvements. And I think we are entering into a difficult period to actually project forward, because we're coming out of the pandemic. And I think actually the analytics previous to the pandemic, it's difficult to determine how much you can actually use that as a marker to project forward. Just on the equity point, again, absolutely welcome that challenge. So this is for those that maybe don't know where this is coming from. So in the page 40 of the appendix, in the appendix report, page 40 of the committee pack, there's some detail on our model, and we're always quite happy to be transparent about the inputs to the modelling and effectively the output from this model that projects returns for different asset classes. It's worth saying it's not a return prediction model. Okay, it's a statistical model that's based on inputs, largely current markets, and also other mathematics that go in there around volatility and risk premia and things. It should be treated, through the lens of it being just a statistical model. Okay, it's not a crystal ball. It's consistent from one valuation to the next. But if you arrive at a particular point in time where you're making a big decision and you have a sense of nervousness about the outputs or a sense of nervousness about the economy in general, then it's right to reflect that in your prudence level and the other measures of prudence, as we've talked about. It's fine to have challenges or questions about the output of the model, but it wouldn't be right to just sort of rip up the model or rip up these outputs and say we don't agree with them. I think you take them through that lens and then you build up prudence elsewhere, which I think is exactly what we've done.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Clark, right.
Thank you. My other question was, if you apply, turning back to the table, if you apply a 6% contribution reduction to each of the authorities or each of those in the table, would the percentage of risk of regret go down equally across them all? I think the answer is, from listening to what's gone on since, is no, because that's only one element of it. But I don't want to make an assumption. So the specific question, Chair, which we didn't get to answer, but I think I found the answer during the current debate, is if a 6% reduction was applied to the contribution across all of that table, would the risk of regret go down equally across them all? And I don't think the answer is yes, it would change dependent on other factors. But am I correct?
You certainly are correct. And apologies for forgetting to come back to that question that you asked earlier. You're absolutely right. The risk of regret would move differently for different employers. And it would be because of some of the things under the bonnet. The most important factor that feeds in would be the current funding position Okay, so if Leicestershire, so presumably just looking at the risk of regret, Leicestershire County Council must be better funded than Blaby, and it might well be if they were to both reduce again, then Blaby's risk of regret would still remain significantly higher, or it would actually, obviously, if you reduce the contribution rate, the risk of regret goes up, and it would go up by a larger amount because there's more chance that you're going to need to do something to fix Blaby's rate if you give them too big a reduction.
Ian, you wanted to say
Thanks,
something?
Chair. Yeah, just to finish off a couple of points that Nick raised, if I may. So the life expectancy has been modelled specifically for Leicestershire within these, Nick. Yep. So that's there. In terms of the modelling at 27, the midway through, yep, the intention is just to give us a guide, not to change the rates.
Okay.
So that would be for future valuation. If we just decided to change it, that would be from the next valuation, but it's to guide us in terms of the direction of travel.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's just a heads up.
Indeed. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. So, David.
As the oldest person in this room, I'm not going to comment on longevity, but could I just raise another matter, Chairman? Looking at this list of people, employer, what account are we taking of the fact that 3/4 of those names are going to disappear in a year's time? I mean, I think it's I think it's a disastrous move that they are all going to disappear, because I don't think there's that much wrong with the current system that it can't be put right with a bit of adjustment. But the powers that be, those who have authority over us, have decided that we're all going to be swept away anyway and replaced by some brave new world. So has account been taken of the fact that all this lot are going to disappear sooner, very, very soon?
Just, Ian, can I...
Thank you, Chair. The results have been modelled based on the current structure of the scheme. If there's any changes to the employers, and that could be boundary changes or employers moving or leaving, we'd have to look at a number of factors, looking at the assets and liabilities that sit within those employers, because they'd effectively have to be merged or split depending on what happens. We'd also have to look at the the administrative side of this as well, because people's pensions may move from one employer to another, so that could cover pensioners as well. So we'd have to look at the overall modelling from the current rates to the new layout, whatever that new layout is. It would still be the same fund, but the allocations within it would change.
It's not just boundary changes, is it? It's a total axe. Everything's going to go, probably including this where we're sitting today. I mean, it begs the question then, are our pensioners going to be better off or worse off following the government's imposed changes?
Yeah, definitely.
To be honest, on a sort of an employee level, when you get into the pension side of it, makes very little difference, because the services that all these councils provide are going to continue. People getting protected employment rights, so people will either the organisation will continue, or people will tube in. The LGPS itself, the rules of the scheme aren't going to change. So on that sort of basic basis, there's just very, very little different. It's more, so I suppose, as Ian's described, on the administrative side of things behind the scenes. There'll be an awful lot of work to happen to kind of change the arrangements, but actually for individual pensions, it's statutorily kind of defined what people are going to get. So there'll be very little difference. Of all the things going on with reorg, this is probably one of the most settled. So and it is important. It is a question that people are asking, that we do get that message across, that this isn't going to be detrimental to their sort of pension entitlements.
Thank you, Declan. Clive.
Yes, I'm not sure I can answer this, but what's the pound value of the 6% reduction in year one?
At whole fund level, I presume you're asking. Yeah. I don't have it to hand. We can. I'll perhaps circulate it after the committee. We will have a figure. It would probably be an estimate at this stage because we don't have, of course, it's dependent on payrolls of all those employers. But where it does become very relevant is on the cash flow side, which I think there is a note in the paper that mentions that it would, of course, eat in to the current net cash flow position, but the fund's still in a very healthy net positive position, probably still north of 20 million per annum.
Strikes me a little bit odd that you don't have that number to hand, but I would imagine for a cash flow it would be quite important, particularly as a number in year one, but also apply in year 2 and year 3. So it's going to be a multi-million-pound hit on the fund.
Multi-million
at a time. If I could just finish.
Oh, sorry.
At a time of political and high economic uncertainty, to not have that value seems a little strange.
We certainly do have the value. I just don't have it to hand. If I was to guess, I would say it could be in the order of sort of 30 million. I think the net cash flow position was around sort of 50 or higher than 50, and we've estimated it might come down to about 20 million. Of course, big money, but the most important factor when you're talking about cash flow position is, are you still in a position where you can pay out pensions with the money that's coming in? There's a lot of pension funds that are on the precipice of sort of cash flow negativity, and cash flow management is a massive factor. It is not as big a factor for this fund and this committee at this stage.
So if it is 30 million over year one, it could be 100 million over 3 years.
It could be 100 if it's 30 in 1 year, then of course 100 over 3 years. But I think it's the per annum figure is the important thing, because you're trying to balance things on a year-to-year basis versus versus pensions that are going out the door on a year-to-year basis.
So, am I right in thinking, Tom, at the moment the fund, actually the contributions are coming in from pension from employees are actually covering the outgoings onto the pensioners?
Yeah.
So we are cash flow positive at the moment, and this, obviously you've looked at it, and this isn't going to detrimentally affect us going forward.
Indeed, yeah, you're absolutely right, Chair. So for some other funds in this same position, if we were reducing by 6% of pay, or 30 million per annum, or 100 million over 3 years, that would be something that you would need to look at actively and urgently. We've already done this analysis in February last year, and as part of that analysis, we projected a potential 6% reduction. So we can infer the result with a decent degree of confidence that with these reductions we'll still be in a very strong cash flow positive position. This is something that this committee will need to deal with eventually, maybe in the next 3, 4, 5 years, around when you do particularly get to a point where the contributions that employers are paying are not enough to pay the pensions that are going out the door on a kind of day-to-day or month-to-month, year-to-year basis. And at that point, that's when you need to look at your investment strategy and maybe look at income that's coming from your investment strategy, or even in the extreme case, selling off assets. You're not there yet, so that thankfully isn't something we need to consider today when we're looking at this, but it is something in the future that you would need to consider.
Thanks, Tom. Bullish.
Just to add that it's a fairly well-trodden path. You know, although we're cash flow positive, there are a lot of funds in the LGPS which aren't. So there's lots of ways to balance the books. You know, contributions, pensions paid out, investments that pay income in between. We don't have many that pay income, but we can always switch our units, which are accumulation units, to income paying units to bolster it. So it's a well-trodden path.
Right. Thanks very much. I absolutely appreciate the questions that come forward. They're all valid, and hopefully that's given you some reassurance. Has anybody else got any other questions? Yeah, Vipul.
So going back to the sort of risk of regret, and just trying to understand the model a bit better. So if it's based on 120% sort of funding target, how would that risk of regret change if it was 110% or 130% funded? Just for an idea of how that risk of regret number changes.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and so it's probably easier to think about it if you're to put the funding buffer, this funding target, whatever you want to call it, down to 100%, then that risk of regret goes down. Okay, because basically you don't need to hold as much money. So chances are that these contributions that we're setting, that they're more than enough. Okay, so there's a lower chance that you're going to have to, in 3 years' time, say, oh, we made the wrong decision and actually you need to put your contribution rates up. Okay, so that risk of regret would go down if you were to reduce the funding target to 100%. And that's when I said earlier that when we talk about risk of regret, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to move the contributions in 3 years' time. It just means that you're going to have to take some sort of action. One of those actions that would be on the table would be to look at that funding target.
Do you have the numbers for like the risk of regret for 100% funding level as opposed to 120? Just so.
Not offhand. We have ran them. We've ran a multitude of different things, and you can imagine that we've tried to distill the analysis into 10 or 20 pages for the committee, but it could easily run to 100, 200, 300 pages if we're to pull off every single combination of model that we've ran there.
It would be great if you could share just a handful of maybe 120 or 130%, just as a point of comparison. I think in principle, it looks right as a decision to make, but it'd be helpful to know how that risk of regret changes.
Yeah, I would guess it comes down by about 5 or 6% just from memory. So if you're talking about county council at 11, that might be somewhere around 5 or 6% risk of regret.
Would that be for 100% funding level?
That'd be for that would be 100. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's of that order. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Declan.
Just wanted to add to this because this piece can be a little bit counterintuitive. Obviously, if you lower your funding requirement, obviously you need less money, hence risk of regret goes down. But the problem on a sort of practical basis, if your funding level has gone down and you're at 110%, you can take a relatively relaxed view and you don't have to take sort of, I suppose, emergency action with employers. If your target level is 100 and you're dropping to sort of 90, 95, your outlook on the world is very different, and we can never get the position that the fund was in, even going back 10 years when it was only 70% funded. So we'd be inclined to take much more sort of strenuous action with the employers. So even on the face of it, it might feel better that the kind of risk of regret's gone down, hence it's a good thing. But actually the consequence of that in the future could be quite severe for employers. We're saying actually it's not a nice 1% increase every year. It could be kind of actually you've got to give the 6% back straight away. So the table's simplified for a reason. We've just got to be careful of those unforeseen kind of consequences.
Okay, thanks. I think it's a lot clearer now, Tom. Thank you. Has anybody else got any other questions they want to ask? Yeah, Nick.
It's not really a question, it's just a comment, really. I totally agree with Declan's view on that, is that what you don't want to do is to have an employer suddenly say, oh, you need another 6% to increase within that. And the other point is, because the fund has been prudently managed in the past and employers have paid in, then the employers are getting some money back. Now, that's only fair and reasonable within that, as long as the fund is properly funded, which, I get, and I think that's fair and reasonable. Now, because we are our own fund, we can do that. If it was one central government fund, they'd snaffle it. So it's a really important position that the benefits of what we have done over the years accrue to where it's been funded from.
Yeah, and that's true, and I'm certainly hoping that nobody's going to snaffle anything here. I mean, we're looking towards a sort of comfort rate of 120% funded, which gives us a bit of leeway and allows us to. We've looked at 5,000 different scenarios. I absolutely agree with what people are saying. It is an uncertain world, but they're within reasonable expectation of what's going on at the moment. We should be fine, but it's absolutely understand exactly what you're saying, Nick. It's really up to us to keep an eye on it, but within the bounds of reasonable expectations at the moment, we seem fine with 6% reduction. So if there are no other questions, The committee has been asked to approve the following. The proposed changes to the stabilised employer contribution rates from the 1st of April 2026 to the 31st of March 2029, subject to there being no material changes. B, the consultation with the stabilised employers to discuss the proposed rates from the 1st of April 2026 to the 31st of March 29. And C, the mid-valuation cycle review in September 2027, which again gives a bit of leeway as to looking at exactly what the scenario is in a couple of years' time. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Can I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Scribner. Is everybody in favour? Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? So that's unanimous. Thank you. So on to agenda item 7 is the Pension Fund Policy Report, which is a hefty report of 157 pages, which and Ian is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, apologies for the size of this report. The majority of it's made up of the appendices. This is the annual report that we bring through, which is a review of all the policies that we do every year. So these are all the policies that sit behind pensions. What is a slight addition this year is the pensions regulator brought in a new code of practice. So what we've done is, whilst reviewing the policies as we do every time, we've also considered pension regulators code of practice, and where there's necessary need, we've incorporated those points into the policies and sort of beefed them up. It's not as though we haven't been doing this, it's just we put more information in to show the governance, to tie the two things together. I didn't propose, considering the amount of detail in here, going through each one, but all the policies are included on our website, and they're available on point 6. The changes we've made are fairly subtle in the majority, and they are sort of detailed within the actual report themselves rather than looking through each appendix. So would propose really to sort of take any questions if
thank you.
Does
any there are alterations, but not massive significance. Does anybody get any questions that they want to ask? No. So if that's the case, the committee is being asked to approve the revised policies. I propose that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Hilary. All those in favour? Right. Nobody against or abstaining. Right, so that's unanimous. So the next item is item 8, the Pension Fund Business Plan and Budget 25-26, which is reported on pages 201 to 226 of the agenda. Simone Hines, Assistant Director, Finance, Strategic Property and Commissioning, is presenting this report. So Simone, over to you. Right. For one horrible moment, I thought you weren't there, Simone.
Yes, quietly on. Thank you. This item presents the pension fund business plans for 25-26. So you've got both the administration business plan and the investment business plan. And there's also the proposed budget for the next financial year as well. Both business plans and the budget have already been to pension board earlier in February and have been approved. So firstly, I think at Appendix A, you've got the administration business plan. And the main priorities in there are really as they have been in previous years, actually. So we've got continuing the implementation of McLeod, which continues to be a significant workload, continuing the implementation of the National Pension Dashboard as well, and of course the valuation process, which you've just heard about as well. And there's also a review of several of the fund's current contracts that will be done over the next 12 months as well. Then at Appendix B, you've got the investment business plan, and again that covers kind of the 5 main areas that you've had in previous years. So it covers training policies, a general updating of policies, which includes the net zero policy there, asset allocation, fund valuation and reporting. You'll see as well that both of the business plans make reference to the government's Fit for the Future consultation, just because although we haven't had the outcome yet from government on the consultation responses, we wanted just capture that in there so that we were able to go back and respond to any outcomes during the year once we know what the government's direction of travel is. You've then got the proposed budget for 25-26 and you've got a table that shows the budget for the current year through to 26-27, just so you can see that comparison. And you can see sort of one of the main areas of the budget is the investment management costs. There's then the LGPS central costs in there as well as our sort of internal staffing and support costs and the actuarial costs as well. We have included some additional staffing in the budget for next year. That's 2.5 FTE, so fairly modest, but that is primarily to deal with the impact of McLeod, because we are seeing that workload have an impact on kind of the general workload in the team, and we want to make sure that doesn't get any worse in terms of backlogs. So we have included that. And then I think you can see quite importantly in that table that shows the budget that although admin costs are increasing, as they will do with inflation and some of those other costs that I've mentioned, but admin costs as a proportion of assets under management, which is quite a key metric, are remaining broadly sort of static over the period, which is quite a good indicator. And costs are rising there, it's sort of in proportion with assets rising. You have got quite a lot of detailed information in that report under the different headings, but I won't go through that all in detail. I'll probably leave it there actually and ask committee to approve the report, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Simone. Has anybody got any questions or queries? Nick?
Just one question. Why has the transactions cost gone up by 6 million compared to budget this year?
That's the table at page 10, it's page 202 on my agenda. And Bilesh, I'm sure we'll be able to give some more detail on this, but I think when we set the budget in 24-25, that was before we'd had the outturn from the previous year. And I think because we've had the types of investments that we're now using because they are high returns, they also incur some high costs because of the nature of them. So I think we'd started those the previous year, hadn't had the full impact of those increased costs, which is why the budget was set a bit lower. But the forecast for the current year and in future years now reflects those increased transaction costs because of the type of investments and the number of investments that we're now choosing to invest in. But
thank you, Bilesh.
I'll just add a little bit to that in the sense that, you know, you'll have things like stamp duty in there. So we're adding to a property fund at the minute, and it depends on when the fund actually makes purchases. So, you know, a lot of those may relate to stamp duty for the new LGPS Central Direct Property Fund, which we'll have representatives for later in the
It's actually very similar to the prior year as well, so it just looks like the budget was a bit low.
Okay, so that answers that one. Has anybody else got any other questions or queries that they'd like to raise? No? So the committee has been asked to approve the Pension Fund Administration and Investment business plans and the Pension Fund budget for 25-26, and also note the training plan. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Just on the training plan, just conscious of the fact that obviously there are elections on the 1st of May, and so therefore there could be, well, there will be, whatever happens, there'll be new members appointed from the county council. So I'm just wondering, in light of that, is that sufficient time lapsed the 13th of June to allow that, because middle of May, the annual council, isn't it? So are people going to, I can put it like this, new appointees going to understand that they're appointed and they've got to have this training before, you know, all sorted out, just given that there will be new people? How are we going to make sure?
Yeah,
I know that's a previous issue you may have had.
Yeah,
given
I think we've had that issue before. I mean, there is a training plan. I think officers will ensure that people who come on will be given sufficient time to train.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we recognise that and hopefully get as many new county councillors as possible, but it's also, I guess, the rest of the committee who might not change, so we have it in the diaries, but we will have induction training with any new members as well, which will be separate to that, just obviously as soon as they're appointed.
Okay.
I think it would be reasonable expectations and give them time to do it.
Chair, Somebody else must have the mic on. Sorry, well, the training place, personally I'm speaking now, is in a good place, and the access to it is excellent. It's only the willingness, and that's not criticism of anybody, but it's the willingness and availability, because it certainly has benefited myself. So I think the training place is in a good place, and I don't have any concerns going forward, so long as whoever it is representing has a willingness to do it. So I'll park that there, and happy to second your motion, Chair.
Hilary, did you want to say something?
Well, I think all I was going to say, which virtually this gentleman has said, is that it could be that there are very little changes. There will still be some councillors, one way and another, that are still re-elected. I can't see all 54 councillors being not elected, and some of them will be, and who have already had the training, have already sat on this committee, or in the past or again. But the training is excellent and it's easy to access.
Thank you.
And I think we just trust the administration.
Right, so I propose the things. I've had a second, and Mr. Cartwright second. Is that agreed by everybody? Anybody against? Any abstentions? No. So that is passed unanimously. Item 9 is the risk management and internal controls. Ian is going to introduce the risk report. So please, Ian, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report that we bring to each board and committee. This is the overall risk register that includes both the administration and the investments. I'll just briefly touch on the few minor changes. This one was taken to board in February and there were no comments. We've removed one of the risks that's been on there for a while because the risk was really low, and that's to do with GMPs, guaranteed minimum pensions. That's a technical element within a pension calculation. That is standard business as usual. So we've now removed the risk because it was so low. We've updated the LGPS regulations and guidance requiring the fund investment pooling and governance processes to reflect fit for the future. So that is now captured within that risk. And we've added a new risk, which is an actual fact regarding the administration team, the pensions admin team. We've done some analysis of the staff in the section, and within the next sort of 5 years, we could have sort of over 45 to 50% of those staff retire, which is quite a significant number of the team. And given the complexity of pensions and the variety of pensions, we just wanted to put it as a risk on the risk register. So we've recognised it. We're doing work to mitigate it. We've got a lot of internal training. We've got a lot of external training that starts this year. We've used some apprentices. So we're looking at sort of the age profile. But we just wanted to recognise it on the risk register because it is a genuine risk around the age and the administration capabilities if everybody was to retire without that being actioned. And that's really all I was going to say, Chair.
Thank you. Martin.
Just one from me. Great, thank you. The GMP, guaranteed minimum pension, I think it's prudent it's in there that it is identified as a risk. I just don't understand why we don't just turn it to a magic green rather than remove it altogether, because it identifies that we've looked at it and it's good. I would sooner see it in, Chair. It's not a challenge. I just would prefer it to be in and shown as green rather than removed, because I think it's a win-win. That's all, Chair.
Yeah.
The reason we decided to take it out is the GMP reconciliation exercise, which was a national exercise, highlighted the importance to all funds to do this national piece of work, which is effectively getting all the GMP data from the HMRC and ensuring that data was actually recorded, reconciled, and any pension changes, either increases or decreases, were all actioned. That was the main GMP exercise that was done, and that's been complete. The way that the process now works is anybody who retires who's got a GMP, and everybody has, it depends on how much service they've accrued, and it's a historic point. So these are lessening in terms of numbers as well. If there is a person who falls into it, we can just go on the HMRC GMP checker, get the information, put it on the record and proceed as normal. So it's kind of just becomes part of the retirement process. To me, to have a specific risk on one element of a retirement process, it didn't feel quite right. Now the national exercise is done, but I do take your point. I consider it, but that was the rationale for why we decided to take it out.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any queries or questions? No? Oh, yep. Sorry, Nick.
Totally agree with Ian about the losing the expertise. I think the administration is actually extremely good, and I've had personal experience recently about it. So we wouldn't want to jeopardise what works for us, which for a lot of authorities it doesn't work for. And the other point is, in terms of the risk, I think there's a sort of bigger risk in terms of the government trying to pinch our money still. I'll come back to it, but I'm concerned about that in terms of, wanting to use our funds for its own objectives rather than us deciding for the benefit of our pensioners.
Yeah, I certainly, I wouldn't disagree with that, Nick, but I mean, the committee is going to keep a strong eye on that. There has been government consultation and we've made our views clear. Absolutely, it's a risk. I agree. But there's some things we can do something about and there's some we can't, but the determination of what we do is really still in our court. It isn't for the government at the moment. I know exactly what you're talking about. Right, have we got any other queries or questions? No? So the committee has been asked to note the risk management and internal control report and approve the revised pension fund risk register. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Grimley. All those in favour? Right, that's unanimous. There's nobody against that or abstaining. So on to agenda item 10, which is the report from DTZ International, UK property update on pages 237 to 256. I would like to welcome Chris Cooper, Sarah Bell and Sam Bryce from DTZ, and we also have Andrea White and Jennifer Lineker who are online. Yeah, we have got them there. Yeah, so Mike Hardwick, Property Director from LGPS Central, is also in attendance. So Ulesh, over to you once our guests have sat down.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give our representatives from DTZ a moment. Brilliant. Okay, so similar to previous manager introduction reports, the purpose is to provide information on the fund's direct property investments. Appended to this paper is a presentation which will be delivered by DTZ once I've finished this introduction. So a bit of background first, covered at points 3 to 8. The fund, as at the end of 2024, has a direct property allocation managed by Colliers, which is valued at 94 million, and a newer UK direct property allocation managed by DTZ at about 68 million. The fund's other large manager is LaSalle, who manages via investments into property funds. That's currently valued at 272 million. There are two other smaller closed-ended funds which are in the process of returning capital. Taken together, those two are valued at 50 million. They invest solely in UK direct property. DTZ also managed these, though they were originally created by Aegon Asset Management. Taken together, the total property holdings are valued at 484 million, or 7.3% of total fund assets, which is slightly short of the target allocation of 7.5%, which was agreed at the last pension committee meeting held on the 31st of January 25. As part of decisions taken by the ISC all the way back in April 2022, it was decided to move the management of the Colliers direct property investments to DTZ at the appropriate time. The process to move that management of those existing UK assets has now commenced and is planned to be completed in the next month or so. It was also agreed at that meeting that LGPS Central would launch a UK direct property fund. And the Leicestershire Fund would invest 120 million split over 2 years. That commitment has been made now and is in the process of being called. Points 9 and 10 of this report cover the specifics of the Central and DTZ mandates and what DTZ will cover in their presentation. I think that's about time for you guys to start. So if there's no other questions, happy to hand over.
Okay, has anybody got any questions for Buldash? No? So, Sam, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you. So good morning, I'm Chris Cooper. Just to give an overview of what we're going to cover, it's three main structural elements: an overview on the property market and an update on that, an introduction and a reminder of the position with the central sub-fund, and the third element is then to give you an update on your own property portfolio. As we go through that at each instance, we want also to give you an update of some of the things that we're doing and seeing as both the risks and the opportunities through environmental, social and governance factors in real estate investing.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Great. So if we could go on to page 3, please, Vinesh. Thank you. I thought it was worth just giving the committee a quick reminder of the role of property, commercial property in a mixed asset portfolio. And this is focusing on two elements. One, the returns that you might expect and the nature of those returns, but also a reminder of the risks inherent in investing and how we think about those. In terms of returns, that chart shows very long run, so the last, since 1981, 43, 44 years of return. And like all markets, there is volatility. The thing we like about real estate is that dark blue. It's a very strong core of income return. So the income return is about 75% of total returns invested in commercial property in the last 40 years. So you have a core of about 6% per annum running through that income return. What we're looking for both in the sub-fund and also to maximise the potential in your existing direct property portfolio is to have solid sources of income which themselves have good potential for future growth. That's how you get core sustainable returns from the asset. Thinking about the risk, for us, there are 4 main risks in investing: location, credit, obsolescence, which incorporates ESG factors, and leasing. As a house, the thing we're most interested in, to make a return, you have to take risk. As an investment house, the thing we're most focused on is how you can manage that risk. What skills, what tools do you have to be able to minimize the impact and maximize the return? And therefore, that's how we separate it on that right-hand column. The risk that we're most against is location risk. We invest about 85% of our capital in the top 6 economies across the UK. That's not cities, that's regions in terms of economic output. The risk we're most prepared to accept is what we call leasing risk. We will take short-term leases into portfolios and back our skill as managers to be able to re-let those on better terms. We will buy assets with vacancy because we believe we can secure better income coming out of it. But those are the key areas for us. Within a portfolio can tolerate each of those risks across its boundaries, and Sarah's going to explain a little bit about our observations on your own portfolio there. But our fear, I suppose, at individual asset level is to try and avoid assets that compound those risks within an individual asset. So a poorly located asset with weak credit, often you'll find the pricing isn't compensating you for the risks you're taking. That's my sort of broad introduction. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those. Otherwise, we can move on to the property market with Andrea.
Okay, Vipul.
So I'd like to ask in terms of that sort of location risk. So would I be right to assume in that instance that the East Midlands isn't a massively competitive region across the UK, so our members' money isn't being used to invest in infrastructure or commercial property in their own backyard?
So that there are two ways of looking at one specific to this portfolio. One, obviously, from the point of view of the central sub-fund, and then the other from your own holdings. The East Midlands is one of those critical regions, as we see it, the economies for us to look to invest. Our focus more recently, historically, it's probably been around retail warehousing and essential retailing. For example, next to Welford Road, we have the retail park there, not in this fund, but for one other client fund. But more recently, light industrial and logistics is the main focus for the benefit for the East Midlands region. Elsewhere across the country, you're looking at different drivers that drive the economy. But yeah, East Midlands, Greater London, that sort of triangle of Bath, Bristol, Exeter in the southwest, Oxford to Cambridge, Greater Manchester, and then the M8 corridor, the Glasgow to Edinburgh. Those are our core location choices around the UK.
Thank you. Glad to hear that.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So when we talk about risk against, I'll use a different analogy so you understand where I'm going with the question. So in terms of infrastructure, data centres, we invest in the building, not the data, because that costs a lot to produce and procure the equipment, and it goes out of date very quick. But the building doesn't. But that's the reverse happens when you talk about logistics. At the moment, logistics is very popular. But we're starting to see, and we will see over time, a reduction in the use of logistic premises simply because of robotics and all the other stuff, or requiring new premises and the old ones are out of date. So my question specifically is around using those two analogies, looking at logistics. What is the time frame for the investment, taking into account the risk that was a good idea at the outset, it might not be by the time you get to the end of it?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really, really good observation. I think as thinking about time frames, first of all, we are generally long-term investors. So when we look to buy investments, we've usually got a minimum 10-year hold period in mind. That doesn't mean to say that you're definitely going to hold it for 10 years. You might hold it for 50, and equally after 3 or 4 years, the profile of risks and returns might have changed. That might make you look to change your view on the asset. So once a year, we review in an annual strategy what we expect the returns to be from that property, thinking about our market forecasts. But we also review our assessment of the asset itself, of what risk should I, what returns should I require for holding this asset given its current risk characteristics. And your point's really well made. It's more noticeable in logistics these days. 20 years ago, it used to be very noticeable in shopping centres, and probably 40 years ago, it used to be very noticeable in offices, that a lot of the value, what we look at real estate is a nice mix between the amount of value that's in the land, the amount of value that's in the building, and the amount of value that's in the tenant, the lease. And what you find in these situations with very purpose-built buildings, or buildings that have been very tailored since for one particular user's use, you're shifting that dynamic of roughly one third to an awful lot being invested in the value of the building or the tenant's credit. And that sort of brings you into that risk stack that I'm talking about, where too much of the focus is on the quality of the tenant's credit. And ultimately, as real estate investors, we can't influence whether we can help a tenant through its payment schedule and so on, but we can't really influence its core business. So we like to move away from that. I think logistics as an asset class, there are some highly mechanized buildings now that we're not interested in investing in, because I think the nature of that as an investment has changed from what the thing was that we liked about it many years ago. Many years ago, the land was the most valuable bit. You had 4 walls and a roof. and you had an occupier in there for a period of time, it had a high income return, might yield you 7-8%. And today the same thing, less value in the land, more in the buildings and the credit, and it yields you 4%. So it's really changed. It's gone from being a value investment to a growth investment, and that risk parameter has shifted. So yeah, we think about it that way. We think about the investment for the long term, but we review annually whether the risk characteristics match, what we require from that investment.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone got any other questions? No. So thanks for that, Chris. Appreciated.
So we'll move on. Andrew will now take us through on page 4 a bit of an update on the real estate market.
Okay, so just starting off with market performance in 2024. So the year ended positively for the commercial property market as capital values continued to strengthen across most of the sectors. This resulted in the annual all property total return on the MSCI quarterly index coming in at 5.5% for 2024, which was a marked improvement on what we saw in the previous year, where the total return was minus 0.8%. Performance remained highly polarized across the sectors, with annual total returns ranging between plus 12% to minus 2%. The top performing sectors last year were retail warehouses, shopping centres, industrials and healthcare, which all performed the all property average by a respectable margin, outperformed the all property average by a respectable margin, whereas the office sector continued to deliver the weakest returns over 2024. In terms of the investment market, we also saw activity improve throughout the year. Volumes exceeded 50 billion in 2024, which represented a 35% improvement on the prior year and was also 11% above the 10-year average. Investment activity was also highly diversified in 2024. So the traditional sectors accounted for less than half, around 46% of the annual volume, which was the lowest proportion on record, whereas the alternative sectors witnessed very strong levels of investment activity. Looking forward, we expect to see a slight moderation in investment activity in the first quarter of 2025, and this is due to the recent increases in government bond yields, which has affected the relative pricing of real estate and also the cost of debt. Most economists are optimistic that gilts will decline in 2025, but the volatility in financial markets and geopolitical pressures could impact investor confidence and also decision-making in the short term. But despite the challenges, there still remains a significant amount of capital to invest in the market, and we expect that this will be deployed into areas of the market that are supported by structural tailwinds and also very strong market fundamentals. If we move on to the next slide to talk about the economic outlook. So while the year ended positively for the commercial property market, this has not been matched by developments in the UK economy. So since the start of the year, we've seen weaker GDP growth, we've seen weaker business sentiment, we've seen increased geopolitical pressures under the Trump administration, and also increases in bond yields following a global bond market sell-off and market unease around the policies announced in the autumn budget. Looking forward, we expect global headwinds, inflationary risks, and bond market volatility will continue to cloud the economic outlook. According to the Bank of England's latest forecasts, GDP is expected to grow modestly by 0.75% in 2025 and by 1.5% in 26 and 27. CPI inflation is expected to remain above the Bank of England's 2% target both this year and next, due to rising global energy prices, increased water bills, stubborn wage growth, and the upcoming rise in the employer's national insurance contributions. The bank has also warned that interest rates could be restricted for longer, and interest rate cuts will be more gradual. And as shown in the table in the top left-hand corner, interest rates will modestly decline from 4.2% in 2025 to 4% by 2027. The combination of these factors could weigh on property yields in the short term, but as interest rates are modestly cut over the forecast period, we expect yields on an all property level will stabilise over the remainder of the forecast period, which will return the property gilt yield premium back to sustainable levels and those levels that we've seen prior to the global financial crisis. If we move on to the next slide, in terms of our all property forecasts, with limited yield compression expected over the next couple of years, we expect capital returns will be fueled by rental growth, which averages around 2% per annum over the 5-year period. Now, this will mean that income will be the primary driver of property returns over the forecast period and will average just over 4.5% over the 5-year period. As a result, this pushes our all property total return to 6.2% per annum over the 5 years as a whole. The chart on the right plots our rental growth projections, and as you can see from here, both the alternative sectors and also the industrial sectors offer the best rental growth prospects, whereas all other areas of the property market will see rental growth undershoot the all property average, and also the annual rates of inflation that are forecast on the Bank of England's latest projections. Just finally, in terms of our sector forecast, we expect that segment performance will remain polarised over the next 5 years. And on our latest set of forecasts, the annualised total returns range from +3% to +8%. The sectors that we would recommend to target include the alternative sectors, such as the living sectors, and also primary healthcare, and also essential retail segments, which in this case are supermarkets and retail warehouses, plus the industrial sectors. Most of these sectors are forecasted to deliver stronger than average forecast returns. In terms of those sectors we would recommend to avoid, these include non-prime offices and also non-prime retail sector. Both of these sectors are likely to be impacted by lower levels of demand, both from investors and also occupiers over the forecast period. Care homes is also another area that we would, at the moment, suggest to avoid, just because of some of the increases in national insurance contributions and also in the minimum wage, which is likely to affect the EBITDA of many operators over the short term.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. In this next section, I'm going to give an update on the LGPS UK Direct Property Fund, talk about the fund's objectives, the background to the fund's objectives, the strategy, and also the progress that we've made in building the fund out to date. So by way of background, the fund was set up to invest in a diversified portfolio of direct UK real estate with the aim of outperforming the UK quarterly MSCI benchmark. And to do that, we've set 3 core objectives for the fund. The first is to invest the allocation. It's a new fund, and we set a 2-phased target to invest the allocation. In phase 1, to invest 150 million of the allocation, but then with a medium-term target to invest up to 500 million pounds. As I mentioned, that there's a target to outperform the MSCI quarterly benchmark, and the target is to outperform by 50 basis points on a 3-year rolling basis after an allowance for the fund fees and expenses. And then finally is to ensure that we invest responsibly. So we have a number of key ESG performance metrics with the aim of ensuring ongoing environmental compliance and targeting a net zero targeting net zero in 2040. And we set an overall strategy, which is set out on the right-hand side of the slide, which aligns with our responsible investment philosophy and the attitude to risk, which Chris set out earlier on in the presentation. But ultimately, our aim is to invest the capital into sustainable locations, into dynamic locations, high population growth, high employment growth, and areas where we can capture strong tenant demand. Mitigate risk through diversification, diversifying the fund, diversifying tenant credit risk, ensuring there's limited concentrations of lease expiry concentrations within the portfolio, and driving the returns through asset management. And importantly, investing into flexible targets, and that's important for 2 reasons. Number one, ensuring that we invest into assets that are capable of transitioning to net zero, to meeting our net zero target in 2040, but also assets that are flexible enough and can be adapted to meet both current tenant demand as well as future tenant requirements. You can move. Thank you. So moving on to those individual objectives, as I mentioned, the first one was to invest the allocation. To date, we've invested just under 77 million of that first £150 million tranche of investment. And there are a number of further opportunities in the pipeline that have the potential to take us to that £150 million target. The focus to date has been on investment into sectors where we see the best performance prospects and the performance prospects which Andrea mentioned earlier on. So you can see on the slide at the bottom left, the 4 investments that we've made to date. Those have targeted investment into multi-let industrials and to retail warehousing. And those are 2 specific sectors that we foresaw some strong performance and have delivered strong performance over the last 12 months or so. So the investments we acquired to date have been focused, like I say, on multi-let industrials. We've got 2 industrial investments in London, and we have 2 retail warehouse parks, one in East London, one in the southeast in Maidstone. And we've included the dates of acquisition on the slide here, which, as you can see, we bought in the course of the last 12 months, just over 12 months, at a time when the market was moving, and we've seen some solid performance through the timing of those acquisitions. As I mentioned, the strategy for the fund is to invest into a diversified portfolio, and there is at this stage some concentrations in terms of geography and sector, but that is partly as a result of the relatively early stage of investment into the fund. But what we have been making sure we do is building diversification at the asset level. So the table on the right-hand side of the slide just shows how we've complied with the strategic targets that we set out, investing into the sustainable locations, diversifying the income, ensuring environmental compliance. But as you can see, we are, there's 33 tenants in the portfolio. There's a high degree of diversification at asset level. And just to pick up on the point on sustainable locations, we mentioned that we like to invest into assets where there's a strong underlying value associated with the land. And there's 2 particular assets that I would pick out that really demonstrate that within the portfolio at the moment. And they're bottom left and top right in the 2 pictures, Goodmayes Retail Park in East London and Clayton Business Centre in Hayes. Both assets located and have benefited from and will continue to benefit from investment into public infrastructure. They're located close to new Crossrail stations and areas where there is, as a result, significant investment and regeneration. So the underlying values are underpinned, both in terms of the existing assets, but also potential alternative uses in the future. Then moving on to the second key strategic target, investment performance. In 2024, the fund outperformed the benchmark. And we see that the reason it did that was there's 2 reasons. The first is the allocation of capital to those higher performing sectors that I mentioned when I was talking through the previous slide. And what we've done here in the graph is mapped out how the sectors have performed, the different sectors within the benchmark, and map that against where the fund is currently invested. And that's really to look at how the fund is structured and whether it's benefiting from overweight positions to overperforming sectors, and conversely, it's not exposed to underperforming sectors. So in summary, at the moment, the fund is positioned well. It has got focus to the retail warehousing and to industrials. Just to describe the graph on the left-hand side, the light blue bars are effectively the benchmark sector returns, so returns at subsector level, industrials, retail, warehousing, relative to the overall benchmark return. So the bars on the right show outperformance against the benchmark average. And then the dark blue lines are the funds weighting relative to the benchmark. So again, the bars to the right are where there's an overweight position. So at the moment we are overweight to those sectors that have performed at above benchmark level. And the second reason for the performance has been capturing asset management opportunities. And we've got two examples on the slide here. Clayton Business Park, when we acquired it, part of the rationale was we saw strong growth in the income. The average rents were £13 a square foot at acquisition. And to date, we've gone through a number of lease renewals, lettings and rent reviews, where we have pushed the rents up to a headline rent of £24 a square foot. So a significant reversion of reaching 80% in terms of increase on rents on the original rents when we acquired the asset. So showing good, strong performance on the income line. And similarly, part of the reason we liked the retail park in East London was, again, low average rents compared to the wider London market. We have had a vacancy here. We did have a carpet right within the scheme. And when we got that space back, we have marketed it, and that has demonstrated a strong uplift in the rents versus the rents when we bought it, and also the assumptions we made at acquisition. So again, positive movements in terms of improving the income line. We are also extending leases and just generally supporting the values and increasing the values across those assets. Move on to the next slide. So the final strategic target was ESG performance. DZ investors set a very clear ESG policy, which we integrate across all of our fund management functions. And for the LGPS UK Direct Property Fund, that's really focused to date on the buying side and now the managing of the assets once they're under management. So we've been showing that we're buying the right assets, we're managing them in the right way. And that's both to meet our net zero targets in 2040 and to ensure that we are complying with legislation and finding ways of improving the efficiency of the buildings. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that the strategy isn't focused on ensuring we're buying the best, greenest buildings at this stage. What we are focusing on doing is making sure we're buying the right assets that can be transitioned in the future. And we're ensuring we are planning for that at the outset, at the point of acquisition, so that costs are built in, a strategy is built in that we can then deliver once we have the assets under management. Practically, how we're going about doing that is through ensuring a deep level of environmental ESG due diligence at acquisition stage. We undertake net zero audits to identify the strategy to move the assets to net zero through their life cycle. We assess physical risks, flood risk, for example. We undertake specific flood risk reporting. And we also review things like energy performance certificates to ensure that they're either compliant or that we can move them to be compliant in the future as legislation changes. And as I said, we build a strategy together. We include the cost within our cash flows, and once we have the assets under management, we incorporate that into our management and our asset planning. So that includes asset improvement plans, which we put in place for all of our assets, which identify the targets and the various steps we need to make at various points within the asset's life cycle to make the various improvements. And one other very key component of that is tenant engagement. That's for two reasons. Firstly, to understand tenants' usage of energy, of water and waste production, so that we can set a benchmark to then make improvements against. But also to help support the tenants in achieving their own ESG targets, making improvements to their buildings. They will have their own corporate policies, and we aim to work together with the tenants to make those improvements, which benefits both parties. And again, an example at our retail warehouse park in East London, where we have been going through some leasing activity. We have been engaging with the tenants to identify what improvements we can make at that particular leasing point. So we're looking at things like changing lighting to LED, asking tenants to ensure that they are meeting minimum energy efficiency standards requirements. So it's built into our asset management. That's the update on the sub fund. Does anybody have any questions?
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. It's specific. It doesn't look great, does it, for the care home sector? And I'm just confused because plenty of members around this table understand the need to move people into care homes, but also understand the cost pressures on those. They're a weighty business in terms of staff, and I get all the national insurance, not going there with that, but I understand why you've identified that. What I don't understand is why that's picked out specifically, why that section isn't just advise against high cost yield businesses with low returns, rather than picking out a specific one. It just intrigued me why care homes were targeted individually rather than a more generic high cost low yield, because of all the factors that are in there, because there's many more sectors other than just care homes that would deliver the same demographic. I'm just puzzled why care homes were targeted individually.
I think it's a very fair comment. I don't think it's particularly targeted. I think it was an example, but your point is absolutely right. If you take leisure as an example, that's another sector that fits exactly the same dynamic. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting stuff, all good stuff. Just looking at the assets that you've got in for the industrial retail warehousing. You mentioned about engaging with tenants on ESG improvements and that sort of thing. But I do see on here lots of large spaces for potential for PV panels. I don't know if that's something you didn't mention that specifically, but is that something you do try and encourage or try and invest into?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, you're absolutely right. These type of buildings do lend themselves to PV panel installations, and there are various nuances around actually installing them. But we are going through a process on a number of assets at the moment within the portfolio, and specifically on the assets in Maidstone, where we're looking at the feasibility of installing PV panels on the roof. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. We're looking at a landlord installation. We are also talking to one of the tenants within the estate there, who have actually approached us to install their own PV panels. So it does form a clear part of our ESG strategy and asset improvement plans, to understand the feasibility and then take those kind of projects forward where they are feasible.
Clive.
Just looking at the graph on slide 10, the relative returns of the offices in the city, West End and South East, compared to the relative weighting, they're all somewhat underwater, you might say. Is there any plans to change the relative weightings that you have in those areas towards something with a bit more return?
Yeah, I think the relative weightings at the moment are really a function of the relatively early stage of investment of the portfolio. And if we look to the longer term, the aspirations of the fund is to build a balanced portfolio that will be invested across the various sectors. And there are within our IMA, there is various sector control ranges that we have to be within a certain element around. So the expectation is within time that we will be invested across a number of those additional sectors that we're not currently invested in. We have focused on those sectors that are better performing in the short term. I think what you're saying, particularly on the office sector, there is a slight divergence of performance between different types of assets. The performance here has been driven by reductions in capital value for more kind of secondary style of assets in a number of cases. The occupational markets we are seeing more positively in the more core markets at the moment. So we expect there potentially to be a strategic investment into that sector at the appropriate time. Probably focusing on, well, we'll be focusing on the core markets in London, major key kind of regional cities.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine.
We looked at a couple of purchases, a couple of slides back. That's the slide, yeah, where the passing rents were a lot lower. Can you talk in a public forum about how the purchase prices reflected that, the opportunity to get back to market rents?
Yes, thank you. So you're absolutely right. We, at the point of acquisition, we undertake a cash flow assessment of the assets, looking at current income and future potential growth in income and current estimated rental values. So we do make an assessment at acquisition to understand where we think the rents will be at the next set of lease events. And that is built into the acquisition price. What we have, though, been able to do on a number of occasions here is outperform those performance targets or those acquisition assumptions. So the rents that we have agreed most recently on a number of the assets have been ahead of where we assumed at acquisition.
Thank you.
Sorry, good morning, everyone. Over the next few slides, I'm going to explain a bit about the portfolio transition and the work that we have done so far on the existing portfolio. So DTZ Investors has been appointed to manage the existing Leicestershire County Council pension fund alongside the separate investment in LGPS Central UK Direct Property Fund. And so I thought it would be useful here just to reiterate some of the fund's objectives, which do vary slightly from the LGPS Central UK Direct Property Fund objectives. Namely, the first one is that no new investment is permitted into this fund and all new allocations will go to LGPS Central, and in future any sale proceeds that are realised from disposing of underperforming assets in this fund will be reinvested into the central fund. Secondly, the fund will be benchmarked against the Central UK Direct Property Fund, and the target is to perform in line with it. And on ESG, the objectives will be broadly the same as the UK Direct Property Fund, where the portfolio will be managed in accordance with DTZ Investors' net zero policy, and we will of course comply with all relevant legislation. In terms of the fund transition so far, whilst the formal handover of the fund occurred on the 14th of February, the transition started back in December, and when we began preparations to transfer data, set up all our operations, finance, reporting systems and processes. In mid-February, the handover of the portfolio in terms of the property and asset management matters happened. We've already inspected about 80% of the properties by income, with the remainder to follow by the end of March. And as we speak, in-depth facilities management and property management handovers are ongoing between the previous managers and our team. We've also appointed new independent valuers, and they are going to be producing December 2024, March 2025 valuations, and then we'll continue to independently value the portfolio on a quarterly basis. We have issued rent demands for rent collection for the upcoming quarter date on the 25th of March, and that will set off the process of client reporting for Q1, and that will happen early in Q2. And thereafter, we'll be starting our annual strategy formulation for the fund and business planning, and we will report back in Q2 on that process. Thought it would be helpful for you to gain an understanding of what we're doing. When we take on a new mandate, we will undertake an analysis of the portfolio to understand the themes and what's happening within the portfolio, and in particular we'll look at how the properties within the fund are allocated. So this is a similar chart. You'll recognise this from what Sam's been talking about. So we've already started this process and the chart on the left hand side shows how the existing actual portfolio breaks down. So the properties in the portfolio, we split them into different sectors, and then we look at how under or overrepresented that sector is within the portfolio relative to the benchmark. And then we look at how each sector is forecast to perform. On this chart on the left-hand side, the dark blue shows the weighting of the portfolio across the sectors relative to the benchmark, and the light blue shows the forecast return. And we, as Sam said before, we see a good performance where the two are positively correlated. So you want to be overweight in a sector that you consider is going to perform well or outperform. And we've highlighted in green on this chart those sectors in the existing portfolio that show this correlation, where they are both overweight and are forecast to deliver positive returns. And these sectors, you won't be surprised to hear that it's retail warehouses, industrials in both the southeast and the rest of the UK. On the other hand, if you're overweight in a sector that is not forecast to perform well, then that will hamper returns as you've got higher exposure to a negative. So that we can see here with the one sector that is highlighted in red, where the portfolio is relatively overweight to southeast offices, which are forecast to perform less well and deliver negative returns. But in the round, we can see with the portfolio is at the moment reasonably well placed at a macro level, with several sectors both overweight and forecast to perform well. The next stage, which we haven't yet completed, will be to drill down into looking at individual properties within the portfolio and to understand and evaluate their individual risk profiles within the portfolio. And we'll be assessing them, each property against those 4 risk items that we touched on earlier: location risk, leasing risk, credit risk, and obsolescence, incorporating ESG risk. The chart on the right is an example. So this is just an example. It's not the portfolio data at this stage. It's an example of how we evaluate each of those properties against those 4 risks. We'll give them a risk rating. And then the interesting thing is to aggregate them, to look at the portfolio as a whole, to understand if we've got a lot of exposure to one particular risk. So for instance, if a portfolio's got lots of void, then it increases the leasing risk. Or if it's got a high number of ESG issues to address, then obsolescence is going to be a big factor to address. And then from that analysis, we can start to draw out the themes, highlight what the strategic priorities of the fund should be, and that will help us to mitigate risk going forward and to drive performance. And as I say, that's the next stage for us to complete over the coming weeks. So our immediate focus is on 4 key priorities, and these fall broadly into 2 areas. On the one hand, maximising returns, and on the other, mitigating risk. The first 2 key priorities fall in the maximising returns category, and these are developing the fund strategy. And secondly, there's a series of immediate actions to create and protect the portfolio's value and liquidity. So in terms of developing the fund strategy, we'll be undertaking the types of portfolio risk analysis that I've just highlighted. We'll be building asset improvement plans and business planning, what we think the asset management initiatives should be for each property. These will incorporate ESG targets and an ESG assessment and forecasting against a risk-adjusted target rate of return. And we'll be focused on this, as I said, in the coming weeks. Secondly, we've already identified a number of immediate actions to create and protect value. So we're currently dealing with some really high priority lease or issues at specific properties and proactively managing upcoming lease events over the course of this year. About a third of the portfolio by income has got some kind of income event this year, whether that's a rent review, a lease expiry, or we're dealing with a major tenant that's in administration at the moment. So those are the things that we're focusing on as immediate priorities. In the second area is mitigating risk. The fund has got a number of leasehold assets that we need to develop a strategy for. So we need to go through the coming period and obtain a thorough understanding of what the fund's potential liabilities are in relation to that risk on those long leasehold reversions, so that we can plan and put in place any measures, whether they be financial or otherwise, and put those measures in place in good time so that we can reduce the fund's risk exposure. And then the final key priority is to undertake a full portfolio review of MEES, so minimum energy efficiency standards, and EPC compliance. We will also be undertaking full risk assessment of flood and climate related risks, introducing green lease clauses into new leases. That's actually something that we've already undertaken on a lease renewal, and this will enable us then to have more control over assets' environmental performance, more visibility and capture of tenants' data, and will help us to mitigate risk in the long term in the fund. That concludes the presentation. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Martin, you've got some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just an interesting one in terms of, so when reporting, particularly a large client, the larger sheds, if you like, not specifically are targeting those, but the larger performers have a greater impact on the ability to derive the profits. Then you talk about, quite eloquently, about companies in administration, and therefore the risk of return. You don't get what you expected, but actually what you get from the receiver in the end, in most cases, is pretty dismal, if anything at all. So how is the reporting done between what was a wonderful asset that turned a high volume return into something that became a liability in the end, reflected in the figures? I know it's really, you probably can't answer it now, but it's a really difficult demographic to actually get to the bottom of. But ultimately, when you're looking at a whole portfolio in terms of specifically tenants, when you've got a really good A-rated tenant that becomes a Z-rated because they're in administration, how does that all go into the mix? Because it's one end of the scale to the other. I hope I've explained it.
Is your question how does that impact returns once you hold an asset, or is it more how does it impact?
No, how is it recorded so you can see over time the travel between a good A-rated returner to a Z-rated, to try and mitigate the risk, because nobody knows what big company is going to go next. Yeah. Is that a better way of phrasing it?
No, that makes perfect sense. It's a really good point. On the early slide that I spoke to, I mentioned that that credit risk is a risk that is very difficult for us to control directly in terms of the tenant's own business. but there are a few tactics that you can apply still to try and get the belt and braces around what you have in the lease. With an operating tenant in place, you may be able to secure a parental guarantee, a guarantee from a superior quality company within that group that offers better credit. You may be able to secure a rental deposit, which gives you some ability. If the tenant's not paid rent, you can draw on that deposit. There are some insurance products. As a house, we haven't ever explored those because we think they can be quite expensive and not necessarily guarantee you a return, but there are insurance products that be considered to draw upon in the event of tenant default. But for us, probably the most important mitigant is the quality of the underlying property in the first place. It sort of takes me back to when you asked your first question about the obsolescence. It's absolutely hits the nail on the head. If you have a tenant of the credit quality could be good today, but gets worse in future. If the building suits them and nobody else, you're compounding your risks. So what we want is buildings in locations where lots of enterprises want to be, different sectors of the economy, and that is suitable then to lots of different operating formats. So in the worst case scenario, you have got an alternative use. When Sam mentioned the asset that we've acquired in the Central Fund, which is in East London, not only can you think about alternative use for the existing buildings, but the developed density of that site at the moment is only about 35–40% of the total site area. So you can also think about additional development on the site. It makes the underlying land that much more valuable. So in terms of how we think about it, we're trying to move away from an over-reliance on that tenant's credit, because as much as we'd like to think we can, we can't influence that.
Right. Has anybody else got any other queries or questions? No? Bill.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions if I may. So first of all, this transition that you're talking about, how long is that expected to take for you to transit and do all these things that you mentioned earlier in your presentation? What's the kind of timeline we're looking at here?
Sorry, just to be clear, is that the transition of your portfolio from Colliers to ourselves?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So it began in December. The midpoint of this quarter, the 14th of February, was when the official responsibility was taken over, and that process completes at the end of this month. So the reason why it's 1 quarter of transition with a formal handover of the baton, as it were, right in the middle of that quarter. The reason for doing that is it gives the outgoing agent enough time to collect the rents that were demanded in the December quarter day, and it gives us enough time to prepare for the March.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And just a second point, Chair, is obviously you're carrying out this review of the existing portfolio then. How long is this review going to take then, do you think, until that's fully completed and you understand entirely what you've, I can put it like this, had transferred to you? Yeah, that's it, thank you.
So the output of that process is a fund strategy that we present in May. So the review will be, the final inspections are being done during this month, so they'll be completed by the end of this month. At the end of this month, you'll get an updated valuation for your portfolio, and we use that valuation data to inform the recommendations. They're sort of strategic recommendations based on the elements that the team have talked about here, but there's also slightly tactical recommendations which will be determined by what the value is at the point of going in. If an asset's in a sector that we don't particularly like, but is actually very, very fairly valued, the chances are that the asset's got pretty good performance potential from here on in. Similarly, the reverse could exist. So we'll need that valuation data to complete the report in May.
Okay, if we have no other queries or questions, I'd just like to thank all the team from DTZ International for your presentation this morning. Very informative and much appreciated. Thank you. So the committee has been asked to note the report and presentation. Is that agreed? Yeah, everyone's agreed. Thank you. So next we come to the report on the summary evaluation of the pension fund investments, which is on page 257 to 276 of the agenda. Bullish, you're introducing the report, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's slightly longer than previous iterations, so feel free to ask questions as we go along. So the purpose is to provide the committee with an update on investment markets, how individual asset classes are performing, and the total valuation of the fund. Looking at market performance and outlook covered in the first few points. So overall global growth and equity market performance was again strong in 2024 against expectations that a repeat was going to be more difficult. If you remember back, 2023 was a very good year as well. Equity market performance was positive for most major markets. You can see that in that table below point 2, driven by a combination of factors, including multiple expansion, which describes the amount per share the market is willing to pay for 1 unit of earnings. And you can see that on the table there. If you've got colour, you'll see the dark blue bits are multiple expansions. In the last quarter of 2024, sticky underlying developed market inflation and expectations of an inflationary policy mix based on inflationary tariff talk continued deficit spending against the new president, Trump, made markets question how far and how fast interest rates could fall. So we had a fairly choppy last quarter. Fast forward to today, and the level of interest rate cuts priced in for 2025 are just 2 cuts for the US, taking them to about 3.75%, and for the UK, which has had 1 quarter point cut already, 2 more cuts are priced in 2025, which would take the UK base rate down to 4%. Whilst the world would welcome lower rates, central banks with their varying mandates will need to balance a multitude of data and competing forces. The table on the top of page 258 shows a handful of developed markets and their current rates and inflation rates. Shows that many recent moves have been lower. The one kind of standout in there is Japan, which has moved up, and you can see that against their inflation rate, which is now at 4%, which is the highest it's been in probably a few decades. At point 6. We highlight how supportive markets have been over the last 4 years. So you can see a table there. The last 4 years have certainly pushed major stock indexes and by extension valuations of pension funds like ourselves, who have listed equity exposure. So you can see the first 3 columns there describing the 3 big indexes in the US, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, and the tech-heavy NASDAQ. You've got annual returns, so 21 through to 2024, and then you've got the bottom row there, which is the annual return, 12% per annum over those 4 years for the S&P 500, and similar numbers across the other major markets. To note there, the fund has access to most liquid equity markets via the global mandates that we have with Legal & General and LGPS Central. So we'll have benefited, as you can see, as the fund is now valued 6.6 billion. So we've certainly benefited from the strong performance over the last 4 years. Going to page 259, so we've seen great returns over the medium term. And I suppose the bigger question is whether or not that level of equity performance can continue. There's commentators on both sides who can build credible arguments for things to continue in the same way or for far more negative outcomes. For a fund like ourselves, which is well diversified across many asset classes, any shorter term negative performance should be seen in the wider context for global investment markets, which have seen growth over long time frames. And that little table there under point 7 shows a rolling 10-year return. So every point on there is an average of the last 10 years returns, and there's only 1 point in there, 2008 I think it is, where the previous 10 years averaged a negative return. So that's minus 0.9% at 2008. So that would have taken you from 1999 to 2008. That period of time had 2 kind of really sharp decreases. You would have had the tech boom and bust, and then you would have had the global financial crisis. But apart from that, you can see returns in the main are positive over the long term. Points 8A to D cover a summary of the Hyman's Capital Markets Review, which is appended to this paper. It covers equities, government bonds, corporate bonds, and UK property. So it's a short summary of what's included within that appendix. Just looking at 8D, which is the Hyman's review of UK property, they talk about similar things to what you've just heard about from DTZ. So on capital values, the declines are moderating, the office sector is still falling, but industrials and retail sectors are seeing increases, so similar to what you heard from DTZ. They also talk about their overall view on it, on UK property for that matter. It's less cautious than the previous quarters, so we seem to be kind of turning the corner is their view as well. Moving over to point 9, and the table at the top of 261, it's a slightly more detailed version of the table that we've been used to seeing over the last few years. It's got a few more rows included. We've split it between public markets in the top half of the table and private markets in the bottom half of the table. Previously, I think we had 1, 3, 5, 10 and 20. It's got a few extra columns in there now. But it's kind of showing you much the same. Things haven't really moved on too much from the previous quarter, just highlighting how strong those equity markets have been. You can see in the last, 1, 3 and 5 years, all have shown big positive movements. Any questions before I carry on?
Any questions from the committee? No. I think
Okay.
we're all, yeah.
Just to confirm then, so portfolio changes for that quarter ended December 24. There's been no material changes to the portfolio since the end of 2024, other than servicing the usual calls from commitments that we've made to private markets. The net effect on cash quarter on quarter has been an increase from 456 million last quarter to 517 million at the end of 2024. We've got some more information on that cash position at paragraph 14. Before we get there, we've got a little reminder on our new SAA for 2025, and that's covered at points 12 and 13. There were 3 changes from the 2024 SAA. I'll quickly just remind everyone. Listed equity increased to a 41% weight from the 37.5%. And as at the end of 2024, the actual weight was nearly 43%. That is within the rebalancing policy range. Property had a reduction from 10% to 7.5%. We're currently at 7.3%. And the final one of those 3 was a small reduction to private credit from 10.5 to 9.5. We're currently at 7% there, so we are underweight there. But existing commitments total around 400 million to that asset class, so we should be recovering that gap. So coming back to that cash point, covered in points 14 to 22, but I'll quickly summarise. We have a very small cash allocation within our SAA, that's 0.75%. The cash position is presented to the ISC each quarter. Just said that we had 517 million in cash as at the year end. Taking the Aegon currency hedge together with that, we've got 8.5% of total fund assets in cash. The fund has, however, made large relevant commitments to the underlying managers which are in the process of being called. Similar to what you've heard in previous quarters, it's now around 900 million pounds. 700 of that is to the pool, so LGPS central products. And we also have approval from prior ISCs to further commit 260 million to central products in 2025 and 2026 across infrastructure. So where we holding a lot of that cash, it's split between money market funds and fixed deposits. The average rate on those fixed deposits, 4.65 was 4.95 at the last update, but we know rates are coming down slowly. And the average term to maturity on those fixes is just over 3 months. We do have a cash flow forecast for the fund, and we think that we could get down to by the calendar year end towards 250 million, but it is largely dependent on a number of factors. So there's 3 factors here. The first one is the speed at which those significant commitments that we've made are called by the managers, and that's largely out of our hands. The second is the pace at which those closed-ended funds return capital. So these are the older investments, primarily in private equity, private credit, and infrastructure. So again, largely out of our hands, how quickly that money comes back. And that last one on top of page 263 is the £175 million investment that we are underweight to liquid credit. So that's the Central Global Multi-Asset Credit Fund. They are just reorganizing that fund. They have two managers. They're looking to replace one of those managers and possibly add a third manager. The minute that process is completed, officers will seek guidance from the investment advisor, and then we will commence the process of adding that 175 million if everything is in order. At point 22, you've got a summary of the fund's asset groups. So that's the growth group, the income group, and the protection group, and how we relate our current valuation versus the target. So it's pretty much saying what it said for a number of quarters now, that we're underweight that income asset group. It's 497 million, and we're overweight cash a similar amount. If you want to see the breakdown for those asset groups, you can see that on the table at the top of page 264. Moving on to overall investment performance, we've got a small table at point 25, which shows the total funds performance for the last quarter, the year, the 3-year and the 5-year. They're all positive. Versus the benchmark, they're all negative, largely as a result of reassessing our benchmarks through last year. So we moved a lot of our benchmarks to be a lot tougher. For example, our private equity benchmark used to be the FTSE All World. We recognise that private equity is a higher risk investment, and therefore we should add a premium. So we changed those benchmarks. So that benchmark for private equity has now become FTSE All World plus 3% per annum. 29 to 40 covers a private equity review. I could read a lot of those bits out, but I'm keen to take any questions if there are any questions here. We invest via 3 managers, LGPS Central in the main, where a lot of our new commitments are going. Adam Street, which was our legacy manager pre-pooling, and we still allocate some money to them because of the kind of products they're able to offer that LGPS Central aren't. And we have a small holding in a secondaries fund, which used to be Aberdeen, is now Patria, which is in run-off as well and returning capital. Finally, we've got 40 to 44, which is a quick run through our pooling progress. You may remember from last quarter's update, the government's ambition is to have all our investments pooled by March 2026. It is feasible. There's a lot of uncertainty across administering authorities surrounding the proposal. And in addition, each pool has been asked to provide a plan to the government. So this is LGPS Central on how those main proposals will be achieved. Central have met that deadline, and that plan has gone to government. We've had no feedback yet, and the minute it does, we'll feed that back to committee. It'll likely be at the next committee in June 2025. The final point here is on point 43. We now have 3.9 billion, so that's about 58% of our total fund assets, which are classed as pooled. The legal and general passive investments transferred over to LGPS Central via an advisory agreement, and that was completed in January 2025.
Thanks very much, Bhulesh. Has anybody got any questions? Martin?
Thank you, Bhulesh. On the 3 you cited were changes to the portfolio, and 2 were specifically on target and had met that ahead of time. 1 hadn't. What is the timescale to meet that target, albeit it's only a small shortfall to target? And the second part of the same question, if you like, it's important to recognise each one individually and see how it's doing. Otherwise, you just got no clue where you're going at all. Absolutely support that entirely. But when you've got like 3 examples like that, Bhulesh, where 2 are better than we hoped for and 1 is just slightly under, it's just a prudence question, really, and it might be just for members, not for any outside organisation to understand. But if you're taking a holistic picture and you're looking at 3 specific bits that we are doing there because instructions were given around that, the fact that 2 have been better quicker and one's been not met slightly slower, obviously the positives on the other 2 negate some of the difficulties on the 3rd one. So would it not be just as an overall exercise to understand the impact when you're taking them collectively, the positives slightly reduce, further reduce the negatives on the negative side? Do you get what I'm saying?
I think I've missed the start of the question, which is, and I should have interrupted you because you're now going to say, I can't remember what you said. Can you remember what you said right at the start?
Right at the start was we moved the percentages, and you quoted 3 cases, the benchmarks,
right?
And 2 we'd met the what we targeted. I forget what classes they were, but you specifically pointed out right at the start 3 where we'd moved them and we'd met them ahead of time, and 1 was slightly behind meeting that target, but you didn't give a time frame for how long it would be before we actually achieved that goal effectively.
I'm struggling to find which bit. Do you know
right at the very beginning
of the report, or
in your report where you said, I forget what classes there were. So we changed I think 1 was 7.6 down to 5.3.
Sorry. I think we're talking about the SAA target.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So we've
Table 22, Bulash.
Thank you.
It definitely is the SSA, yeah.
So the SAA, I think we're talking about the income group. So we're 7.5% behind the target, which is about 500 million. So I think that's what you're talking about here.
But there were 3, you quoted 3, where we were ahead of target on 2 and behind target on 1.
So the growth group is pretty much on target. The income group is 7.5% behind target, and that's made up of infrastructure, private credit, property, and the MAC product, which is multi-asset credit. Is your question around how quickly we can get there?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, it's a difficult because we've made commitments to the infrastructure funds, which is behind target by about 150 million. Again, depends on how quickly that money's called. Global private credit, we've also made commitments largely via LGPS Central. Again, depends on how quickly they're called. Property, which is pretty much bang on. DTZ have got a bit of money outstanding that they can buy a few more properties with. So I imagine that'll get dealt with in the next few months. And the MAC product, that multi-asset credit one where they're swapping out some managers, that is largely dependent on how quickly they complete that process. And we think that's around June this year.
Thank you, Bulash. So is there no other question? Oh, Nick.
In terms of the pooling, and I understand things are still with the government within that, but have we had any more confirmation? Because the concern I had, which was raised at the last meeting, I think it was that LGPS Central didn't actually have a fiduciary duty as part of their remit. And has that been resolved?
I think we did on the consultation. We suggested that they did have a fiduciary duty. Is that right?
I think you're right, Chair. Have we had anything back at all or nothing?
No. So the plan that our fund submitted went out in January. The government then asked the pools to submit their own plans on how they were going to deliver those objectives. That went from the pools last day of February. We've had no real formal feedback. Certain ministers have been talking at certain events, but no real formal feedback yet.
Bill.
Thanks, Bulash, for your report. Very, very informative. There's 2 questions really in my mind. So first of all, about if the government goes ahead with its pooling, you're obviously approximately about a year, 12 months or less, getting near to from what they've stated is their desired aim, which is to have all funds pooled by the end of March 26. I'm just conscious of how long all this takes. is that actually doable from where we are now? That's question number one. Question number two is just about the cash holding, and I am concerned about that because I think we raised it previously about the amount of cash, and I think it's been said before, well, we're waiting for things to be called up. And I get that on one level, but equally, you know, what is it they're waiting for? They're waiting for the right market investment opportunity, or they just haven't literally got around to doing it. I'm kind of trying to understand, is it just market opportunity they're waiting for to cool the funds down because they think, you know, there's it's the right market conditions to actually, you know, call the money on. Put in the market.
Let's do that one first.
Yeah, please. Sorry to ask such a. It sounds a bit basic. I'm just trying to understand that because I think it's really important to understand. Is it that, or is it just kind of administrative? I'm sure it isn't the latter. But anyway, I'll wait till you say thank you.
There's a bit of both, unfortunately. So when a manager is appointed, they have something called an investment period. They can vary between 1 year to 3 years, typically. So if we invest in an infrastructure fund, they might have a 18-month investment period. So they've got to call all the commitment in that 18 months. So for those, it's fairly programmed. You know that they have to call it by that time. Where it's complicated is where you've committed money to LGPS Central, for example, and we committed 150 million pounds. They have to launch a product, and then they have to go out and appoint managers beneath them. So then you're at the subject, you know, you're waiting for those managers who have their own investment periods as well. So it can become a bit iterative. It's not as simple as it first started. Your first question regarding cash holdings.
Well, that was about the cash holdings. The other was about the pooling and where we are now. Can we actually, you know, is it actually feasible? If the government said, go ahead, we want you to do it all, is it actually doable by the target date they've actually set at the moment? Thank you.
Okay, so that was addressed with the LGPS Central plan that went to the government. So they've got a number of ways that we can be 100% pooled. It would be a bit early to talk about exactly how that would happen, but we could do this a number of ways, but it doesn't involve selling assets and then rebuying them in the pool. It could be as simple as giving LGPS Central discretion over the buy-sell of our existing assets. So there's a number of ways to do this, but they require quite a lot of due diligence and legal work to progress.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for this. Oh, Clive.
Just to follow up on that, we got you get 4.65% return on your cash, paragraph 19. So it's not as if it's not doing anything.
Correct. We've been fortunate in some ways, but you're right. We'd much rather be a lot lower than that. But yeah, we're taking steps to get the best we can without taking undue risk in trying to time the market.
Okay, if there are no other questions, and it doesn't look as though there are, the committee has been asked to note the summary evaluation of the pension fund investment report. Is that agreed? Okay, the final substantive item is the responsible investing update report on pages 277 to 292. Kat is presenting the report, so Kat, please go ahead.
Chair, and good morning, members. So obviously it's the normal quarterly report. So we have Appendix A sets out fund's current progress in the RI plan, as was just agreed in January by committee. And then Appendix B sets out the fund's voting reports from October to December. They're kind of just the normal figures, but I guess it's worth flagging from next quarter's reports. Central have been appointed to provide oversight and stewardship services for the fund and other partner funds. So Central are essentially kind of taking the fund's passive LGIM holdings, and they'll be able to oversee these funds on behalf of all 8 partner funds.
Oh,
so the benefit of this is that Central will be able to vote on behalf of the fund. So rather than kind of LGIM voting the shares within those passive funds, Central will vote these. So there'll be that alignment between Central's current equity funds and then the LGIM funds and how they're voted. So if members think back to September, we reported on kind of some of the alignment and maybe and some of the misalignment between how the different investment managers are voting. So that helps kind of go some way to address that. This will also support Central stewardship and engagement activities on behalf of partner funds, especially with kind of some of those stewardship plan companies that the fund has and those kind of key climate commitments. We'll obviously still continue to monitor and understand why Central vote how they do, and if there is any kind of misalignment from recommendations from the local authority pension fund forum, as an example. Central have also done some work on updating their voting principles. So they've got a clear framework for active stewardship, as well as long-term value creation, and their revised principles do include stricter enforcement mechanisms, including their expectations for disclosure and enhanced alignments with net zero commitments for those companies that they are voting on. So we have some of the examples of the quarterly reports. I won't go through them. What I will kind of bring your attention to is RUFA. So while they're quite a small proportion of the fund, they're doing something which I think is quite a good example of what the fund would like to see its investment managers do in terms of targeting net zero and supporting those kind of real world net zero transitions. So seeing real world reductions in carbon emissions rather than kind of just aligning our portfolio so it's green for the portfolio, but there's no impact for the real world. So in September, they've they've gained exposure to 7 companies within the agricultural sector, and they see this as quite an attractive. They have quite attractive attributes with a macroeconomic backdrop, and then also their relative risk premiums. While they've made this investment, they recognise at the same time it will increase the fund's carbon emissions. So agriculture and kind of land use, it's around 14% of worldwide greenhouse emissions, so it's quite a carbon intensive sector. So but they see this is a good opportunity for investment, but then also kind of a really positive opportunity to work with these companies on kind of their sustainability practices. So use of green hydrogen, regenerative farming, and then kind of conservation agriculture and kind of nutrient management. So within this, they've got a plan with a 5-point alignment framework to structure these engagements. And obviously, we hope to see some kind of positive progress, but I think it's quite a good example of what some of our investment managers can do. But I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Kat. Has anybody got any queries or questions on this report? Comments? No? No? So we are asked to note this report. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay. So that is the final substantive meeting. The date of the next meeting is the 27th of June 2025 at 9:30. Item 14, any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent? There are no urgent items. We now come to the exclusion of the press and public. I move that the public be excluded during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, exempt information. Is that agreed? Yeah. So that brings to an end the public part of the meeting. So we'll just wait for Angie to confirm the live stream as and